Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students of Honors Part 4, today I will discuss Robert Frost from American poetry, and I hope that you are all doing very well. And my lecture will be divided into several parts. First, I will discuss about the life sketch of Robert Frost, and later I will discuss Frost's concept of poetry and Frost's salient poetical characteristics, and afterwards I will discuss about the poem Mending Wall, and through discussing Mending Wall I will wrap up my discussion for today. And at the outset I will tell about Robert Frost. Robert Frost was born in 1874 in San Francisco, America. His family was from New England, and Robert Frost graduated from Lawrence High School in 1892, and in 1894 New York Independent accepted his poem named My Butterfly, and through this acceptance launched his status as a professional poet with a check for $15, and he was acknowledged as a professional poet through this acceptance. He won Pulitzer Prize for Literature for 4 times, and in the year 1912 he and his family moved to United Kingdom from United States of America, and he spent 3 years in USA, and in 1915 he returned to USA, and he is a very celebrated American poet. On his 75th birthday, the US Senate passed a resolution in his honor which said his poems have helped to guide American thought and humor and wisdom, setting forth to our minds a reliable representation of ourselves and of all men. In October 1963, President John F. Kennedy delivered a speech on Robert Frost and showed glowing tribute to him. Robert Frost stands at the crossroads of 19th century American poetry and modernism. Some of the works of Robert Frost are A Boy's Will, North of Boston, Mountain Interval, New Hampshire, West Turning Brook, A Further A Witness Tree, Two Masks, and In the Clearing. And now I will discuss Robert Frost's concept of poetry. Frost considered poetry as words that have become deeds. He considered the poet to be an accidental collector of impressions and knowledge. He felt a poem's logic to be backward in retrospect after the act. The reality that the poet touches is the vast chaos of all that he has lived through. And from this chaos, the poet may, with luck, create a clarification of life which produces a momentary stay against confusion. And let us now know some of the salient poetical characteristics of Robert Frost. In Robert Frost, we find tenderness, sadness, and humor, which are sometimes adulterated with vanity. And Robert Frost accepted things sorrowfully. Robert Frost accepted things sorrowfully without exaggerating them as them or explaining them away. We find seriousness and honesty in Robert Frost. In many of his poems, we find real people with their real speech and real thought and real emotion. We also find in him subtlety and exactness and a classical understatement and restraint. And now we will discuss about the Mending Wall. The Mending Wall is a dramatic lyric or a dramatic monologue. And you know, my dear students, dramatic monologue is a kind of lyric poem in which a single speaker expresses his thoughts and feelings to a silent listener. And some of the common features of dramatic monologue are: a single speaker speaks throughout the poem on some specific issue. The speaker speaks to someone who remains silent throughout the poem. It concentrates on the speaker and reveals his character and mindset. It begins dramatically and takes several abrupt turns in the course of its progress. And now I will read some of the lines of the poem of Mending Wall. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it, and spills the upper boulder in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding. And now I will move on to further and read from line number 23 to the verses onward. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines. I tell him, he only says, good fences make good neighbors. And now I will move on to further and will read from line number 32, 31 up till 35. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall. And now I will move on to further and will read the last full lines. Not of woods only and the shade of trees, he will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. And my dear students, the Mending Wall, I have already said, is a dramatic monologue, and the speaker is a young man, and it is from reading this poem we could realize that the speaker is the poet himself, and the other character, that is his Yankee neighbor, is an old farmer. And here the speaker hold a broad internationalistic view, whereas his neighbor hold a narrow nationalistic view. And we find that the mending wall means the repairing of the boundary between two neighbors, and we get from this poem we get the relationship between two neighbors, and it is through this poem we get a reflection of the relationship of two countries, or even the relationship goes beyond two countries to the relationship of all the countries in the world. And we see that the narrator is a broad-minded liberal person, whereas the second speaker he represents a selfish super patriot type of personality. And here we get the orthodox and conservative mentality of the poet's neighbor. And the poet he wants to say that there should not be any wall between the two houses, and every year they sit together and they repair the damages that is made on the wall by the animals and through natural wear and tear. And here we see that the speaker wants to suggest that there should be no wall between the neighbor, but actually the speaker himself takes the initiative to repair the wall every year. That this means that the speaker is also not much crystal clear in his view of liberalism, and there is some sort of narrowness even in the mind of the speaker, and his neighbor always conform to the traditional view that he got from his father and from his forefather, that is good fences make good neighbor. And here we find that the wall symbolizes man-made barrier, and the wall suggests the division between nations, the division between classes, and also the economic, racial and religious groups do have some divisions among themselves. And a very prominent critic, Lennon, says, in the voices of the two men, the younger whimsical, new-fashioned speaker and the old-fashioned farmer, who replies with his one determined sentence, his inherited maxim. Some readers hear the clash of the two forces, the spirit of revolt which challenges tradition, and the spirit of restraint which insists that conventions must be upheld, built up and continually revealed as a matter of principle. Here we see that the speaker emphasizes time and again that the natural forces do also want no barrier between neighbors. Even some natural or invisible spirits are there who are against the erection of wall between neighbors and between countries, and there should be no man-made barrier between nations or between neighbors, and the relationship should be broad, relationship should be intact and should be very much open. And this poem gives us a philosophy, the philosophy of living together without erection, without the erection of wall between neighbors. And it is through this poem the writer want to give us a very deeply orchestrated thought, and we get a very serious idea from this poem. And the poem is characteristic of first colloquial style coupled with unusual Yankee reticence and understatement. The poem expresses first philosophy of brotherhood and tolerance, of honest living, against the neighbor's dogmatic assertion that good fences make good neighbors. And I do believe that if you read this poem, you will get a very excellent message in the form of demolishing all the barriers between ourselves, and about the creation of a very solid relationship between person to person, between country to country, and between state to state, and build a very peaceful, loving, and wonderful world. And with these few words, I would like to conclude my speech for today. And thank you very much, my dear students of honors part 4.